The Force exists beyond sight and understanding, a presence that flows through every living being, binding the galaxy in ways no one fully comprehends. It has shaped destinies, turned the tide of wars, and given rise to legends, yet for all its influence, it remains an enigma. The Jedi spent generations studying its mysteries, constructing philosophies around its nature, and wielding its power in service of what they believed was balance. But how much did they truly understand? For centuries, the Jedi Order viewed the Force as something to be categorized, structured, and wielded within strict guidelines. They defined the light and the dark as absolutes, forces of good and evil locked in eternal opposition. To them, the light represented harmony, discipline, and selflessness, while the dark embodied chaos, passion, and corruption. This rigid belief system shaped everything they did, guiding their teachings, their actions, and their perception of the galaxy's fate. But the Force itself was not bound by their definitions. It existed long before the Jedi and the Sith, influencing life in ways beyond doctrine. Throughout history, moments unfolded where the Force seemed to act with purpose. Anakin Skywalker's birth, untouched by a father. Luke's improbable survival on Hoth. The exact timing of the Clone Wars' end, aligning with the rise of a new Sith Empire. Coincidences, as many would call them, but the Force rarely worked through simple chance. It whispered through visions, nudged individuals toward choices, and at times seemed to intervene directly. Yet, if the Jedi were truly in tune with its will, why did they struggle to see what lay ahead? Their failure to sense the Sith's resurgence was more than political blindness. It was evidence of a deeper flaw in their understanding. They assumed the Force was something to be mastered, that their training gave them the ability to read its movements with certainty. But the Force was neither a servant nor a tool. It was a presence that ebbed and flowed, guiding events without revealing its full intent. Even Yoda, the wisest among them, admitted uncertainty when peering into its depths. The concept of balance stood at the core of Jedi philosophy, yet it was never truly defined. What did it mean to bring balance to the Force? Did it require the destruction of the Sith, as the Jedi believed? If so, why did their efforts to eradicate darkness only seem to strengthen it? Every time one side fell, the other grew stronger, as if the Force itself demanded equilibrium. The fall of the Sith, 1,000 years before the Republic's golden age, led to a period of peace. But that peace did not last. The Sith returned in secrecy, more powerful than before. When they were seemingly destroyed once more, their influence re-emerged through the rise of Palpatine. It was a cycle that repeated throughout history, raising the question, did the Jedi misinterpret balance altogether? Qui-Gon Jinn was one of the few Jedi who sensed something deeper at work. Unlike the Council, he did not believe in rigid doctrine. He followed what he called the living Force, an interpretation that emphasized being present in the moment rather than fixating on grand prophecies or distant visions. While others obsessed over control, Qui-Gon sought understanding. He recognized the Chosen One prophecy, but did not assume its meaning, a perspective that set him apart from his peers. Anakin Skywalker's arrival was seen as the fulfillment of that prophecy, yet his path did not align with what the Jedi expected. If he was meant to bring balance, why did he fall? The Jedi assumed balance meant the triumph of the light, but history suggested otherwise. Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader, while devastating, led to the birth of Luke and Leia, the next generation of Force users who would shape the galaxy's future. Their existence ensured that the light did not vanish, even in the darkest of times. Luke's journey further challenged the Jedi's understanding. Unlike the Order before him, he was not trained from childhood. He formed attachments, struggled with anger, and questioned the teachings he received. Yet, it was his compassion, his refusal to destroy his father, that ultimately restored balance in a way the Jedi had never anticipated. He did not win through superior power or adherence to tradition, but through love and understanding. If balance required the eradication of the dark, why did it only occur when Luke embraced the possibility of redemption rather than destruction? This raises the question, was the Jedi Order's understanding of the Force flawed from the beginning? By enforcing strict rules and severing emotional ties, did they limit their ability to truly connect with it? The ancient Jedi, long before the Republic, had different teachings, ones that did not separate light and dark as absolute enemies, but as aspects of a greater whole. Over time, that knowledge faded, replaced by rigid doctrine. The Sith, in their own way, mirrored this mistake, believing the dark side alone was the path to true power. Neither side sought balance. Each tried to dominate the other, failing to see that balance was not about control but coexistence. The Force did not belong to the Jedi or the Sith. It did not serve them. It was greater than any order, more ancient than any philosophy. It moved through all living things, beyond the boundaries of light and dark. The Jedi spent centuries trying to define it, but the truth remained elusive. Perhaps their greatest flaw was believing they had the answers when they had only glimpsed a fraction of its true nature. As history repeated itself, as the Sith rose and fell, as Jedi teachings were lost and rediscovered, the Force remained, watching, waiting, guiding. Its veil was never lifted, only pulled back for brief moments before slipping into mystery once more. If balance was the true will of the Force, then perhaps it was never meant to be controlled. Perhaps it was meant to be understood. Long before the Republic, before the Sith emerged as their great adversaries, before the Jedi were even called Jedi, there were seekers. These individuals were drawn together not by politics or ideology, but by something deeper, an awareness of the Force and its presence in all things. They did not yet wield lightsabers, nor did they serve as guardians of a republic. Their mission was not to enforce order, but to understand the universe and their connection to it. The earliest records tell of a place where these seekers gathered, a world strong in the Force where their knowledge took form. This world, Ahch-To, became the birthplace of what would later be known as the Jedi Order. It was there atop its towering islands that the first temple was built. These early disciples, drawn from distant corners of the galaxy, had no council, no hierarchy, only a shared purpose: to learn. Their leader, a being now known as the Prime Jedi, sought neither conquest nor dominion. Instead, they meditated on the Force itself, seeking the rhythm that bound the cosmos together. The understanding they reached was unlike the teachings that would come later. To them, the Force was not something to be divided into opposing factions of light and dark, nor was it meant to be wielded as a weapon against an enemy. It was a current that flowed through existence, a presence that required harmony rather than control. The Force was seen as a duality, but not in conflict. The Prime Jedi and their followers viewed balance as an alignment between two fundamental energies, where neither dominated and neither was denied. This interpretation shaped the early teachings of their order. They did not forbid emotion, nor did they reject attachment. Passion was not seen as a path to corruption, but as part of life itself. Anger, fear, and suffering were not inherently destructive, but became dangerous when left unchecked. The Jedi of Ahch-To did not suppress these emotions, but sought to understand them, to channel them without being consumed. Their belief was that by accepting all aspects of existence, They could move in perfect harmony with the Force. Their training reflected this philosophy. They studied the currents of the Force not as something to be wielded, but as something to be felt and followed. Combat, where it existed, was a form of discipline rather than aggression. Their weapons were simple, forged of metal, designed not for war but for defense. It would be many generations before the first kyber crystal was bonded to a blade, before the lightsaber became a symbol of the Jedi. For centuries, this understanding of balance remained unchallenged. The Prime Jedi and their followers maintained their presence on Ahch-To, watching the rise and fall of civilizations across the stars. They did not intervene in conflicts, nor did they seek to shape the destiny of the galaxy. Their concern was the Force itself, preserving their knowledge so that future generations could learn. Yet knowledge rarely remains unchanged. As the Order expanded, as more worlds became aware of their teachings, interpretations of the Force began to shift. New sects arose, each with their own views. Some believed that to be truly in balance, one must abandon emotion entirely. They saw detachment as the path to enlightenment, rejecting anything that might lead to suffering. Others saw power as the ultimate expression of the Force, believing that strength alone determined one's connection to it. These divisions grew over time, splintering what was once a unified understanding. It was in this period of transformation that the Jedi encountered those who would later be known as the Sith. Unlike the conflicts that would define their future, this was not a war of armies, but a war of ideas. A group of Jedi, disillusioned with the teachings of Ahch-To, sought a different path, one that did not seek balance, but dominance. They rejected the notion that the dark side should be tempered, believing that through passion and power, one could achieve true mastery of the Force. This divergence marked the first great rift in Jedi history. The Sith would later claim their own home, forging an empire built on conquest. Their philosophy stood in direct opposition to what the Jedi had once believed. To them, power was everything. Strength determined one's place, and those who were weak did not deserve to wield the Force. While the Jedi sought harmony, the Sith embraced chaos, feeding their connection to the Force through raw emotion. Their growing influence forced the Jedi into a new role, no longer just seekers of wisdom, but defenders of peace. Over time, the original teachings of balance faded. The Jedi, once neutral observers, became warriors. The Force was no longer studied as an interconnected flow, but as a battlefield where light and dark waged war. The Prime Jedi's vision of equilibrium was replaced with a new belief, that the light must always triumph. This shift, while necessary for survival, came at a cost. The Jedi began to fear the dark side, treating it as an enemy rather than a part of existence. They no longer sought to understand it, only to suppress it. With each passing generation, the past became myth, and the true meaning of balance was forgotten. The Jedi of the Republic saw only one path: the destruction of the Sith and the complete eradication of the dark side. But the Force did not align itself with victory or defeat. It sought balance, and when one side grew too strong, the other would rise to meet it. This cycle repeated throughout history: light against dark, Jedi against Sith, each believing their path was the true one. The echoes of Ahch-To remained, hidden in ancient texts and lost temples, waiting to be rediscovered. Luke Skywalker, in his final years, sought answers in the ruins of the first Jedi Temple, drawn by something beyond history, beyond the Order's teachings. He sensed that something had been lost, that the Jedi's endless struggle against darkness had blinded them to a deeper truth. The Prime Jedi had not sought victory, they had sought understanding. And that perhaps was the greatest lesson the Jedi had forgotten. The Jedi Order once stood as scholars of the Force, seeking to understand its mysteries rather than impose restrictions upon it. In its earliest days, the Jedi Code was not a doctrine of control, but a philosophy meant to guide those who wielded great power. It was a reminder that emotions, when unchecked, could cloud judgment, that ignorance led to stagnation, and that inner turmoil could disrupt the harmony of the Force. But over time, the meaning of the code shifted. The Jedi, once seekers of balance, became enforcers of strict discipline. In their attempt to create order, they built a system that demanded absolute control over the self, believing that by suppressing certain emotions, they could protect their students from corruption. The Jedi Code, as it came to be known, followed a simple structure. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. At its core, it urged Jedi to master themselves, to act without attachment, and to trust in the Force above all things. But as the Order evolved, the interpretation of these words became rigid. Emotion, which had once been understood as a natural part of life, was treated as a threat. Attachment, instead of being guided, was forbidden outright. The Jedi sought to prevent the rise of the dark side by eliminating its perceived roots: fear, anger, and love. They feared that by allowing these emotions to flourish, a Jedi would inevitably fall into darkness. But the Force does not obey simple rules. It does not distinguish between light and dark the way the Jedi believed. It flows through all living things, through joy and sorrow, through love and loss. To deny emotion entirely is to deny the very nature of existence. The Jedi, however, saw this as a necessary sacrifice. They taught that true wisdom came from detachment, from casting aside personal desires in service of a greater good. Yet in doing so, they created an order that struggled to understand the very beings they swore to protect. This flaw became most apparent in the life of Anakin Skywalker. Found on a distant world, a child of immense potential, he was brought into an order that was not prepared for someone like him. His deep emotions, his attachment to his mother, his need for connection, these were traits the Jedi did not know how to handle. Instead of helping him navigate his feelings, they told him to abandon them. But emotion does not simply disappear because one is told to let go. It lingers, unspoken, growing in the shadows of restraint. Anakin was not the only Jedi to struggle under these rules. Many within the Order questioned whether detachment truly led to wisdom. Jedi like Qui-Gon Jinn understood that the living Force required a deeper understanding, that true balance did not come from denial, but from acceptance. Yet those who challenged the code found themselves at odds with the Council, which had grown more rigid over time. The war only worsened this. The Jedi, once guardians of peace, became generals in a galactic conflict, wielding the Force not as seekers of knowledge, but as warriors bound to duty. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Jedi had become disconnected from their own teachings. They forbade attachment, yet relied on loyalty from their soldiers. They preached serenity, yet engaged in endless battle. They taught that passion was dangerous, yet fought with unwavering conviction. The contradictions within their philosophy were left unexamined, ignored in favor of maintaining order. And so when the Jedi fell, it was not just the result of war or deception. Their failure was rooted in their own unwillingness to adapt. They had built a system that demanded obedience, not understanding. They had created rules that suppressed emotion rather than guiding it. And in doing so, they made it easier for darkness to take hold in the shadows they refused to see. Balance is not achieved through control. The Force does not demand restraint, it demands understanding. The Jedi once knew this, long ago, before the code became law, but by the time they realized what had been lost, it was already too late. Long before the fall of the Republic, before the Sith revealed themselves from the shadows, an ancient prophecy whispered through the halls of the Jedi Temple. It spoke of one who would bring balance to the Force, one born of no father, whose destiny would reshape the galaxy. For centuries, Jedi scholars debated its meaning, searching for signs, waiting for the moment when the Chosen One would emerge. But in all their discussions, they overlooked a question far more important than when the prophecy would be fulfilled. What if they had misunderstood it entirely? Prophecies are dangerous things. They offer glimpses of the future, but never the full picture. The Jedi, in their wisdom, should have known this. They had studied the Force for millennia, yet even they admitted that the future was always in motion. And yet they placed great faith in the Chosen One prophecy, assuming it meant what they wanted it to mean. To them, balance meant victory, the end of the Sith, the triumph of the light. But the Force does not operate in such simple terms. The origin of the prophecy is shrouded in mystery. Some believe it was first recorded by the Prime Jedi, long before the Republic existed. Others trace it to the early texts hidden deep within the Jedi archives, documents so ancient that their original meaning may have been lost. Over the centuries, its words were translated, studied, and interpreted by countless masters, each offering their own theories. But no matter how they read it, the Jedi came to the same conclusion. The Chosen One would be a force of salvation, a warrior who would rid the galaxy of darkness. This interpretation guided the Jedi Order for generations. They believed that one day a being of unparalleled power would emerge, bringing an end to the Sith once and for all. But nowhere in the prophecy did it say that the Chosen One would destroy the Sith through battle. Nowhere did it state that balance required the eradication of one side. The Jedi, bound by their own doctrine, assumed that because the Sith represented darkness, their destruction would restore harmony. They never considered the possibility that the prophecy spoke not of a warrior, but of a reckoning. Then Anakin Skywalker appeared. A child born of the Force, without a father, his very existence seemed to confirm what the Jedi had long awaited. Qui-Gon Jinn, a master attuned to the living Force, recognized something extraordinary in him. He did not see merely power, he saw destiny. But the Council hesitated. They sensed danger in the boy, a storm of emotion that defied the control they demanded. They tested him, questioned him, and ultimately relented, allowing his training to proceed. But in doing so, they placed the weight of an ancient prophecy on the shoulders of a boy who had never been given the chance to understand it. The Jedi believed Anakin was meant to destroy the Sith, and in a way, he did, but not as they expected. His fall to the dark side nearly wiped out the Jedi Order, plunging the galaxy into an era of oppression under the Sith. To those who had once believed in the prophecy, it seemed like failure. Balance had not been restored. Darkness had consumed everything. But the Force moves beyond the comprehension of even the wisest Jedi. Anakin's fall led to the rise of his children. Luke and Leia, born in the moment of his transformation, carried the Force's will forward. Luke, through his journey, came to understand what the Jedi never had. Balance does not come from destruction. The Jedi had sought to eliminate the Sith, just as the Sith had sought to dominate the Jedi. But true balance could not be achieved through the victory of one side over the other. It had to come from something deeper. When the time came, Luke did not strike Vader down in anger. He did not seek revenge or victory. He simply refused to fight. And in doing so, he awoke something in Anakin that had been buried beneath the mask of Darth Vader. The Jedi had always believed the prophecy would be fulfilled through power, but it was fulfilled through love. Anakin, in his final act, destroyed the Sith, not through conquest, but through redemption. This raises a troubling possibility. If balance was achieved through Anakin's return to the light, then was his fall necessary? Did the Force itself guide him toward darkness so that he could ultimately bring the cycle to an end? The Jedi had assumed they were the architects of the prophecy's fulfillment, but they had never been in control. The Force moves where it wills, shaping events beyond the understanding of any order or philosophy. Some ancient texts suggest that the original prophecy contained a crucial distinction, that balance would be restored through the Chosen One, not by them. If this is true, then Anakin was never meant to be a destroyer. He was meant to be the bridge between the two sides of the Force, the one whose journey, from light to dark and back again, would break the cycle of endless conflict. The Jedi had spent centuries trying to control the future, believing they could shape destiny to fit their vision. But the Force does not belong to the Jedi. It does not obey the Sith. It is not bound by war or peace, by light or dark. It simply is. The Chosen One prophecy was fulfilled, but not in the way the Jedi expected. It was not a warrior's triumph, but a father's choice. It was not a final battle, but an act of mercy. The Force had always been guiding events toward that moment, not for the sake of the Jedi, not for the Sith, but for balance itself. Perhaps the prophecy was never meant to offer hope. Perhaps it was a warning that balance could only come through suffering, through loss, through the breaking of everything that had come before. And perhaps, even now, the Force continues to move, shaping the galaxy in ways no one can predict. Throughout galactic history, there have been moments too precise to dismiss as mere chance. A young queen's escape from a besieged world, the survival of an infant hidden from a vengeful empire, the duel that determined the fate of the Republic. Each event shaped the course of civilization. Yet beneath them lies an unsettling question. Were these moments the product of choice, or was something greater at work? The Force is described as a living energy field, binding all things, influencing destinies in ways unseen. To those who believe in its will, nothing is accidental. Every victory, every downfall, every meeting between those bound to shape history, each one occurs within an intricate web, too complex for any single being to fully grasp. Some believe the Force orchestrates these events, nudging the galaxy toward an ultimate design. Others argue that it is not the Force itself, but those who wield it, who give fate its shape. The rise of Anakin Skywalker provides one of the strongest examples of this mystery. He was born under circumstances that defied natural law, conceived without a father, his existence linked directly to the Force. A coincidence, or an event set in motion by something unseen? The Jedi, believing in prophecy, saw in him a sign of balance. The Sith, ever seeking control, saw him as a weapon. But if the Force itself willed his birth, then it also allowed his descent into darkness. Consider how precisely the galaxy's greatest conflicts unfolded. The Sith, thought to be extinct, survived in the shadows for 1,000 years, waiting for a moment when the Jedi were at their weakest. The Republic, a system meant to unite countless worlds, fell at the hands of its own leaders. Palpatine's rise, Anakin's transformation, the extermination of the Jedi, all of it unfolded in a sequence so perfectly timed that it seemed as though the Force had allowed it to happen. Some argue that these events reflect a pattern rather than a plan. That history is cyclical, and the Force does not guide events, but merely responds to them. The Jedi, after all, did not foresee their own destruction, nor did the Sith anticipate that their rule would crumble at the hands of one they had spent years molding. If the Force weaves fate, then why do those who wield it struggle to see their own paths clearly? Perhaps the Force does not dictate actions, but it does ensure that certain moments take place. A farm boy discovers an old hermit who once fought in a galactic war. A smuggler, uninterested in rebellion, makes a last-minute decision that turns the tide of a battle. A Sith Lord, bent on power, hesitates for the briefest moment and chooses redemption. These are not acts of control, but of convergence, points in history where the Force presents a choice that will define everything that follows. Even the Jedi, for all their wisdom, could not fully understand this. They saw visions of the future, yet Yoda himself admitted that the future is always in motion. If that is true, then how do prophecies come to pass? Did the Jedi's belief in the Chosen One shape Anakin's fate? Or was he always meant to follow that path? The Sith, too, sought to manipulate fate. Darth Plagueis believed he could control life itself, bending the Force to his will. Palpatine believed he had secured his rule, yet he was ultimately destroyed by an act of compassion he had never foreseen. Their pursuit of power blinded them to the possibility that the Force does not serve the ambitions of individuals. The Clone Wars stand as another example of fate's unseen hand. A war that should never have happened, fought by soldiers created for a purpose they did not choose. The Republic's Grand Army was formed before there was even a war to fight, its creation hidden from the Jedi, waiting for the exact moment when the galaxy would be thrown into chaos. It was too precise, too well-timed. And yet, even in the midst of destruction, the Force ensured survival. A few Jedi remained. The Skywalker bloodline endured. Hope was not extinguished. The question that remains is whether free will plays any role at all. If the Force allows certain events to unfold, does it also allow individuals to decide how they unfold? Luke Skywalker stood before his father and the Emperor, holding his lightsaber, fully aware that he had the power to strike Vader down. Did the Force bring him to that moment, or was it his own choices that defined what came next? If the Force creates balance, does it do so by imposing its will, or by ensuring that those who shape history are given the chance to act? Some ancient Jedi believed that the Force does not decide the outcome, only the circumstances, that it does not interfere, but instead creates moments where history can shift. This would explain why the Jedi were allowed to fall, why the Sith never truly vanished, and why those who rise to power often do so under circumstances that seem beyond coincidence. Yet the Force remains silent. It does not confirm its intent, nor does it offer explanations. It is left to interpretation, to belief, to those who seek to understand it. Some see it as a guiding hand, shaping destiny with purpose. Others see only the chaos of the universe, where patterns emerge because those who search for them wish to find meaning. Regardless of belief, the Force continues to weave its patterns. The galaxy turns, new beings awaken to their connection with it, and choices continue to be made. The debate between free will and destiny may never be resolved, but the evidence lingers in every critical moment that shaped the galaxy's history. Whether by design or by chance, the Force remains the ever-present shadow behind it all. The Jedi believed foresight was a gift, a connection to the Force that allowed them to glimpse what lay ahead. Yet this gift carried a burden they never fully understood. The future was never absolute, always shifting, always bending in response to the choices of those who walked its path. Every vision was a possibility, but never a certainty, and those who trusted too deeply in what they saw risked becoming prisoners of a fate they had misunderstood. Throughout history, the greatest Jedi received visions that shaped their actions. Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi who rejected the rigidity of the Order, saw a child on Tatooine and recognized something beyond the ordinary. The Force had willed Anakin Skywalker's existence, but it never revealed the price of his destiny. Obi-Wan Kenobi, in Exile, felt echoes of the galaxy's future, yet could do nothing to change its course. Luke Skywalker, on his own journey, saw a darkness that had not yet taken form, but would one day threaten everything he had built. Each of them saw glimpses of what could be, but none of them were given the full truth. Yoda, the most experienced of the Jedi Masters, warned that the future was always in motion. To see beyond the present was to risk misunderstanding what lay ahead. The Jedi archives contained records of seers who had misinterpreted their own visions, mistaking possibilities for inevitabilities, guidance for destiny. Even the wisest among them struggled with this truth. Anakin Skywalker's downfall was written in visions long before he realized it himself. He saw his mother suffering and arrived too late to save her. He dreamed of Padmé's death and swore to prevent it, only for his actions to bring about the very thing he feared. Every time he tried to escape what he had foreseen, he ran toward it instead. The dark side did not grant him greater control over fate. It convinced him he had no choice but to surrender to it. The Jedi had long feared the dangers of foresight, not because visions were false, but because they were incomplete. They forced those who saw them to question whether they were being given a warning or a path they were meant to follow. Qui-Gon believed Anakin was the chosen one, but was the prophecy real? Or did the Jedi's faith in it ensure that it would come to pass? Obi-Wan Kenobi, long after the fall of the Jedi, came to understand the limits of foresight in a way he never had before. He had seen Anakin's potential, but never the darkness that would consume him. He had trained a boy who was destined for greatness, yet he had never foreseen the man who would become Vader. The Force had not deceived him. It had never shown him the full picture. Luke Skywalker faced the same burden. On Dagobah, he saw his friends in danger and rushed to save them, not realizing that his very presence would worsen their suffering. Later, in the depths of the Jedi Temple, he confronted a vision of himself turning to the dark side, but was it a warning or merely a reflection of his fears? Every vision carried meaning, yet no vision ever carried the full truth. The Force did not reveal the future as a fixed path. It presented crossroads, possibilities waiting to be shaped by the choices of those who saw them. Those who misinterpreted their visions often became trapped by them. This was the greatest danger, not that the visions were wrong, but that they could never be fully understood. Some Jedi questioned whether the Force had a single will at all. Were visions meant to guide them, or were they merely echoes of potential futures? When Yoda sensed the rising darkness, he did not know whether it could be stopped. When Obi-Wan looked into Anakin's eyes, he did not see the Sith Lord he would become. When Luke faced Vader, he did not know if redemption was still possible. The Force gave them glimpses, but never answers. Perhaps that was the true nature of foresight, not destiny, but choice. The Force did not bind the galaxy to a single fate. It did not demand that certain events unfold. It only offered moments in which decisions could be made. Qui-Gon's faith in Anakin, Obi-Wan's belief in Luke, Yoda's understanding of balance, these did not shape the future because they were predestined, but because those who saw them acted upon them. The greatest tragedy of foresight was not knowing what lay ahead. It was knowing that the future was never set, that even the clearest vision could shift into something entirely different. The Jedi saw the darkness approaching, but they believed they could stop it. They trusted that their wisdom would be enough. Instead, they became victims of their own understanding, blind to the fact that the Force had never shown them everything. In the end, the Force's greatest mystery was not what it revealed, but what it left unanswered. And for those who sought to see beyond the present, the heaviest burden was knowing that even the most certain vision could become a future that never was. Among the Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn was an outsider. He saw the Force not as a set of rules to follow, but as a living energy that spoke to those who listened. The Jedi Order had spent centuries refining their philosophy, but Qui-Gon sensed that their rigid interpretation had led them away from its true nature. His belief in the living Force set him apart, and his willingness to follow it without question shaped the fate of the galaxy. The Jedi understood the Force as divided between the cosmic and the living. The cosmic Force governed the grand design, shaping events across time, while the living Force was immediate, guiding through instinct. The Order favored detachment, believing destiny was fixed and that interference led to imbalance. Qui-Gon disagreed. He believed the Force called for action in the present, that it was not meant to be followed passively. This philosophy placed him at odds with the Council, who saw his defiance as reckless. His differences were not out of arrogance but out of conviction. He saw how the Jedi clung to structure, how they had distanced themselves from what the Force was truly saying. This belief led him away from their expectations and onto a remote world in the Outer Rim. When he arrived on Tatooine, he did not know what he was searching for, only that the Force had led him there. It was on this world that he met Anakin Skywalker. The boy's presence in the Force was unlike anything Qui-Gon had encountered, a manifestation of power that could not be ignored. The Jedi had spoken of a prophecy, one that foretold the coming of a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. Qui-Gon saw Anakin and believed he had found the fulfillment of that prophecy. But was this destiny or a warning? Qui-Gon did not claim to know the full truth, but he trusted the will of the Force. Without hesitation, he took Anakin from Tatooine, convinced that the boy's future was one the Jedi could not ignore. He did not seek approval before acting. He followed what he knew to be right. The Jedi Council did not share his certainty. They sensed the boy's potential, but they also saw his fear. He had known loss, had formed attachments, had lived a life unlike any Jedi before him. The Council had spent centuries treating the dark side as something to be eliminated. Qui-Gon believed balance was something deeper, but they rejected his claim that Anakin was the chosen one, seeing in him the potential for disaster. The Jedi misunderstood balance. To them, the dark side was corruption, something to be purged. Qui-Gon questioned if this belief had created the very imbalance they feared. Perhaps the Force did not call for the destruction of darkness, but for a true equilibrium. Perhaps the Jedi, in their refusal to accept anything but the light, had disrupted what the Force had intended. But Qui-Gon would never see the answer. His discovery of Anakin was his final act. On Naboo, he faced Darth Maul, a Sith warrior unlike any seen in generations. The Jedi had believed the Sith extinct, but the dark side had only waited. The duel was relentless, a battle of precision against raw aggression. In the end, the Jedi were unprepared. In a single moment, Qui-Gon fell, leaving his apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, to finish what he could not. His death changed everything. Had he lived, would Anakin's path have been different? Qui-Gon understood something no other Jedi had, that Anakin was not like other Padawans. He had known pain and attachment in ways the Jedi could not comprehend. He could not be trained as they had been. Obi-Wan, though skilled, had not seen this. He trained Anakin in the only way he knew, believing discipline was enough. But the Force does not move in straight lines. If Qui-Gon had been there, would Anakin have fallen so easily? Qui-Gon was the only Jedi who might have understood what Anakin truly needed. Not detachment, but guidance. His death left the boy to an order that feared what he represented, an order that failed to understand him. In time, they would push him away, and when the dark side reached for him, he had no one to pull him back. Even in death, Qui-Gon's discovery did not fade. His belief in the living Force became the foundation of a greater truth. He was the first Jedi in millennia to uncover the path to immortality, not through power, but through unity with the Force itself. He transcended death, guiding Yoda and Obi-Wan from beyond the physical world. The very Jedi who had dismissed him were forced to acknowledge that his understanding had surpassed their own. The Force had led Qui-Gon to Anakin. It had shown him something no other Jedi had seen. And though he did not live to see the prophecy fulfilled, his influence remained. He had discovered the truth about balance, but the Jedi had been too blind to accept it. By the time they did, it was already too late. For centuries, the Jedi believed themselves to be the guardians of peace, the ultimate force for justice in the galaxy. They stood as warriors and diplomats, arbiters of conflict and defenders of the weak. Yet, beneath their wisdom and discipline, a quiet arrogance had taken root. Their failure was not simply in their inability to sense the Sith's return, it was in their misunderstanding of their own role. The Jedi Code taught that emotions clouded judgment, that attachment led to suffering. They believed balance could only be maintained through rigid discipline and detachment from personal desires. But in their pursuit of purity, they severed themselves from the very thing they claimed to serve. The living Force, immediate, ever-changing, was something they no longer trusted. They followed the wisdom of the past, yet refused to acknowledge how the galaxy had changed around them. By the time of the Republic's final days, the Jedi had become more than a religious order. They had become generals, military advisors, and political figures. They sat in the Senate, aligning themselves with the Republic, believing it to be the embodiment of democracy. But in doing so, they allowed themselves to be drawn into wars that were never theirs to fight. They had once been peacekeepers, but now they were soldiers. This shift did not happen overnight. Over generations, the Jedi's relationship with the Republic deepened, and with that connection came obligations. They became enforcers of Republic law, believing that preserving its rule was the same as preserving balance. The Jedi of the Old Republic had once traveled freely, answering the call of the Force wherever it led them. Now they moved only when sanctioned by the Senate. Their independence had faded, their purpose entangled in bureaucracy. This was the foundation of their blindness. They believed they were serving the greater good, but in truth, they had allowed their judgment to be shaped by politics rather than the Force. When Qui-Gon Jinn presented Anakin Skywalker before them, they hesitated, not because they sensed darkness in him, but because his arrival did not fit within their structured way of thinking. Qui-Gon had followed the living Force, trusting its guidance above the traditions of the Order. The Council, however, had become too rigid to see what he saw. They did not recognize the Sith's return until it was too late, and even then, they dismissed the idea that such a threat could exist in plain sight. They searched for their enemies in shadows, never realizing that they had already been outmaneuvered. Darth Sidious did not defeat them with strength. He defeated them with patience. He understood their weaknesses far better than they understood his. The Jedi had always viewed the Sith as an external threat, as warriors of the dark side who sought to impose their will through brute force. But Sidious had no need for armies or open conflict. He played the long game, using deception and politics as his weapons. He did not destroy the Jedi in battle. He convinced the Republic to turn against them. He allowed the Jedi to become symbols of war, knowing that when the time came, the galaxy would not mourn their loss. The arrogance of the Jedi was not in their belief that they were strong, but in their certainty that they could not fall. They had witnessed the downfall of countless civilizations, had watched as the Sith tore themselves apart time and again. They believed the cycle of darkness and light was one they had mastered. They were wrong. By the time they realized what was happening, they were already trapped. When the Jedi uncovered the existence of Darth Sidious, they did not move as servants of the Force. They moved as agents of the Republic. They attempted to arrest him, not as warriors of balance, but as enforcers of a political system they had sworn to uphold. This was their final mistake. In their fear of the dark side, they had forgotten their own teachings. They had once believed in listening to the Force, yet they ignored the warnings all around them. The Chosen One stood before them, yet they hesitated, believing they could mold him into their image rather than understanding what he was meant to be. The Jedi had not been destroyed by the Sith alone. Their fall was a slow unraveling, a result of their own blindness. They had clung to tradition when the galaxy was changing. They had mistaken their loyalty to the Republic for loyalty to the Force. And when darkness came for them, they never saw it, because they had already lost their ability to see. Deep within the Jedi archives, in vaults rarely accessed even by masters, lay knowledge that had been buried for generations. Ancient texts, philosophies, and records of Force users who walked different paths, writings that at some point the Jedi Order had chosen to disregard. They had built their code on discipline and control, shaping the Force into a framework that fit their vision of order. Yet in doing so, had they closed themselves off to deeper truths? There were Force traditions beyond the Jedi, sects that had existed long before the Republic's rise. The Bendu, the ancient mystics who claimed to exist between light and dark, spoke of the Force as something beyond simple duality. The Guardians of the Wills, who protected the Kyber temples, believed in devotion to the Force itself, rather than in the Jedi's rigid interpretation of it. Even the Zepho, a civilization lost to time, had once wielded the Force in ways the Jedi never fully understood. The Council did not outright reject these teachings, but they saw them as incomplete, misguided. The Jedi path, in their eyes, was the most refined, the truest form of understanding the Force. Their belief in balance was built on the idea that the light side must be upheld, while the dark side had to be resisted. Yet there were texts, hidden among their own records, that suggested balance was never about purity. It was about harmony. The very word balance had been interpreted to mean the dominance of light over dark. But among the lost teachings, there were writings that described balance differently. The ancient Prime Jedi, the first known wielder of the Force, had not spoken of victory over darkness. He had spoken of coexistence, of an eternal cycle where both aspects of the Force had a place. If the Jedi had embraced this philosophy, would they have seen the flaws in their own doctrine? Even their own history contained figures who had walked different paths, Jedi who had questioned the Council's teachings and sought wisdom elsewhere. Revan, a Jedi Knight turned Sith, had abandoned both orders to pursue a greater truth. Jolee Bindo, a Jedi who refused to take a Padawan, had lived in exile, understanding the Force without bowing to the Council's laws. These individuals were often regarded as outcasts, yet their philosophies held insights that the Jedi refused to acknowledge. One of the most controversial teachings buried within the archives came from the ancient Jedi scholars who studied the Force without allegiance to light or dark. They believed that cutting off emotions did not make one stronger. It made one blind. The Jedi Code demanded detachment, but was this a denial of the very nature of life? The lost writings suggested that emotion itself was not the danger. It was imbalance within oneself that led to corruption, not the feeling of love, anger, or grief. Qui-Gon Jinn had understood this. He had followed the living force, trusting its guidance rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. He had believed that true wisdom came not from dogma, but from listening to the Force in its purest form. Had he lived, perhaps he would have uncovered even more of what the Jedi had lost. The question that lingered in the shadows of the archives was an unsettling one. Had the Jedi limited their own potential? If the Force was vast, infinite, and unknowable, how could a single interpretation be the only truth? The Jedi had once been explorers, seekers of knowledge, but as their power grew, so did their fear of losing control. They chose to define the Force within a structure they could manage. Anything that existed outside of that structure was disregarded. This reluctance to embrace broader perspectives played a role in their downfall. When Anakin Skywalker questioned their teachings, they did not guide him, they restricted him. When the Sith adapted, evolving their methods, the Jedi clung to tradition. The Force was not stagnant, yet the Jedi treated it as though it was. Even after the fall of the Jedi Order, remnants of these lost teachings survived. Luke Skywalker, in his later years, uncovered fragments of ancient wisdom that challenged what he had been taught. He learned that the Jedi were not always as they had been during the Republic. There had been times when they were less rigid, more open to the idea that the Force could not be controlled, only understood. The lost teachings did not offer easy answers. They did not point to one perfect way to wield the Force. But they did reveal something that the Jedi had feared to acknowledge, that the Force was beyond them. It did not belong to the Jedi or the Sith. It was not something that could be claimed or mastered. It simply was. Had the Jedi embraced these truths rather than hidden them, would their fate have been different? Would Anakin have fallen? Would balance have been understood rather than imposed? The answers were buried in time, in archives sealed away, in teachings lost to the stubbornness of those who believed they had already found the truth. Yoda's exile to Dagobah was not an act of surrender. It was not simply a retreat, nor was it born purely from shame or fear. In the wake of the Jedi Order's destruction, there was no battle left to fight, no grand offensive to reclaim what had been lost. The galaxy had fallen to the Sith, and the Republic was no more. But Yoda did not flee to preserve his life. He went to seek the truth that had eluded him for centuries. For over 800 years he had trained Jedi, shaping the Order with wisdom that had once seemed unquestionable. He had guided generations, watching as Jedi Masters came and went, all under the belief that the Jedi Code was the unshakable foundation of balance. But the rise of the Sith, the emergence of Darth Sidious, and the complete and total fall of the Jedi revealed something that Yoda had never wanted to admit. The Order had been blind. He had been blind. Dagobah was not chosen at random. It was one of the most force-rich worlds in the galaxy, a place where the natural world thrived in harmony with the currents of the Force. But there was something else hidden within the swamp, something that few Jedi would ever dare to face, a vergence of the dark side. A cave, ancient and pulsing with shadow, a place where the Force itself seemed to whisper with the voices of fear and temptation. Yoda could have avoided it, could have remained in the deeper swamps where the light side was strongest. Instead, he stayed close to it. The cave was not merely a test, it was a revelation. Yoda had spent centuries teaching that fear led to suffering, that the dark side had to be resisted at all costs. Yet the Sith had not conquered the galaxy through sheer power alone. They had understood something that the Jedi had ignored. Balance was not the elimination of darkness, but the acceptance of its existence. The cave showed Yoda his failures, his arrogance in believing that the Jedi were the sole guardians of the Force. And in that solitude, he was forced to unlearn what he had spent lifetimes believing. The old Yoda, the Jedi Grandmaster of the Republic, would have seen exile as a punishment. But the Yoda who emerged from years of reflection understood that it had been necessary. He had been a warrior, a leader in a war that should never have happened. The Jedi had lost their way the moment they became soldiers, the moment they allowed themselves to be bound to the Republic instead of the Force. They had believed they were bringing peace, but they had been manipulated into becoming weapons of the very system that would destroy them. Yoda's years on Dagobah were not spent in idleness. He meditated not only on the past, but on the Force itself, stripped of the Jedi Order's teachings. He came to understand what Qui-Gon Jinn had tried to tell him, that the Force was not something to be controlled or wielded like a tool. It was not simply divided into light and dark, but was something far greater, something that could only be understood by those willing to listen. Qui-Gon, the Jedi who had defied the Council, had uncovered a path that even Yoda had overlooked, the ability to retain consciousness after death, not through domination of the Force, but through absolute unity with it. Yoda's exile was not preparation for war. It was preparation for understanding. He was not waiting for Luke Skywalker simply to train him as a Jedi. He was waiting for the right moment to pass on the wisdom he had lacked in his own era. He saw in Luke not just a student, but a chance to correct the mistakes of the past. When Luke arrived, he was not given the traditional training of a Jedi. There were no formal ranks, no lectures on the Republic, no rigid doctrine. Yoda knew that the old ways had failed. He had lived long enough to see what happened when Jedi followed the path of tradition without questioning it. He did not demand that Luke conform to the past. He challenged him, forcing him to confront his fears, to look into the dark side and understand what it truly meant. In his final moments, Yoda did not speak of vengeance or reclaiming power. He did not instruct Luke to rebuild the Order as it once was. Instead, he told him that the burden of knowledge was now his. Luke had to decide what kind of Jedi he would become. The cycle of the past did not need to repeat itself. As Yoda became one with the Force, he left behind more than just teachings. He left behind a truth that had taken him centuries to understand. The Jedi had fallen, not because they were weak, but because they had refused to change. They had misunderstood balance, misread the will of the Force, and allowed themselves to become trapped by their own doctrine. Yoda's exile was not defeat. It was enlightenment. And in the end, his greatest lesson was not taught in a temple, but in the silence of a swamp, where the Force had finally spoken to him in ways he had never allowed himself to hear. The prophecy of the Chosen One was never meant to be fulfilled through battle. It was not achieved by destroying armies, nor by wielding greater power than the Sith. The fall of the Jedi had been a failure of understanding, and the redemption of Anakin Skywalker was proof that true balance could never come from Force alone. The moment of his return was not about strength. It was about love. Anakin had once been a boy who dreamed of saving those he cared for. His mother, lost to the cruelty of the galaxy. His wife, a vision of death that haunted him until desperation led him into the arms of the Sith. He believed power would bring security. He believed that by bending the Force to his will, he could shape destiny itself. But power had only enslaved him. The more he tried to control fate, the tighter its grip became. He did not save Padme. He destroyed her. He did not bring peace. He became an agent of tyranny. For decades he was Darth Vader. The name Anakin Skywalker was a whisper of a life long buried. Whatever dreams or hopes he once held had been stripped away, leaving nothing but the will of the Emperor. Vader was feared, but he was also shackled. Sidious had never been a master in the traditional sense. He had been a puppeteer. The man once heralded as the Chosen One had become little more than a weapon wielded by another. Then Luke Skywalker stood before him, unarmed in spirit, but unyielding in will. He did not see Vader. He did not see a Sith Lord or an enforcer of the Empire. He saw his father. The galaxy had spent years believing that Darth Vader was incapable of redemption. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi had accepted that Anakin was gone. But Luke refused to see it that way. He refused to believe that the man who had once fought for good was beyond saving. It was never the strength of Luke's lightsaber that mattered. It was his defiance of the Emperor's expectations. Palpatine wanted hate, wanted anger, wanted Luke to become what his father had become. And for a moment, it nearly happened. Luke lashed out, striking Vader down, standing at the precipice of the same darkness that had once consumed Anakin. But he stopped. He looked at his father, broken and gasping, and made a choice. He threw aside his weapon and declared that he would not fight. It was the moment that shattered everything. The Sith had spent generations feeding on fear and rage, using power as their only answer. But in the face of ultimate darkness, Luke did not fight. He forgave. He saw his father for who he truly was, not the mask he had worn for decades. And in that moment, Anakin Skywalker returned. Palpatine had believed himself untouchable. He had broken the Jedi, twisted the galaxy to his will, and ensured that his apprentice would never betray him. But he had miscalculated one simple truth. Vader was not his. He had never been his. Anakin had been a Jedi, a protector, a husband, and a father long before the Sith had claimed him, and it was not power that freed him from the Emperor's grasp. It was the love of a son who refused to give up on him. The prophecy had always been misunderstood. The Jedi had believed that the Chosen One would destroy the Sith in combat, yet Anakin's final act was not an act of war. It was a father saving his son. It was love triumphing over hate. In killing Palpatine, Anakin did not win a battle. He broke the cycle. The Sith had thrived on selfishness, on the belief that power was all that mattered. But Anakin's last breath was spent in selflessness. He had lived a life of suffering, but in the end, he chose something greater than himself. Was it always meant to happen this way? Had the Force intended for Anakin's fall so that his children could be born? The will of the Force is unknowable, but one truth remains. Balance was never about the dominance of light over darkness. It was about understanding, about compassion. And in the end, the Force found balance not in war, but in the simple act of a father choosing to love his son. The Jedi understood death as a natural part of the Force's cycle, yet only a few ever discovered the path to true immortality. This was not the survival of the self as the Sith sought, nor an extension of physical life through unnatural means. It was something far greater, a complete unity with the Force itself. Qui-Gon Jinn was the first Jedi in millennia to uncover this secret. Unlike others in the Order, he did not believe the Force was meant to be controlled. He followed the living Force, allowing it to guide him in ways that defied the rigid teachings of the Jedi Council. Through this deeper connection, he discovered a way to retain his consciousness after death, a revelation that even Yoda had not foreseen. Though Qui-Gon was struck down by Darth Maul, his journey did not end. From beyond the physical realm, he continued to learn, guiding those who would come after him. Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi became his first students. During the final days of the Jedi, When darkness consumed the galaxy, Qui-Gon's voice reached them, revealing a truth they had never been taught. This knowledge changed Yoda's understanding of the Force, leading him to seek solitude on Dagobah. It reshaped Obi-Wan's purpose, preparing him for the role he would play in Luke Skywalker's training. Both would learn to transcend death, their spirits bound not by the limitations of flesh, but by their complete surrender to the Force's will. Anakin Skywalker's transformation into a Force ghost was different. Unlike Qui-Gon, Yoda, or Obi-Wan, he had not spent years in meditation, preparing for this transition. Yet in the final moments of his life, he let go of everything: his pain, his hatred, the identity of Vader. In his last breath, he returned to the light. And in doing so, the Force embraced him. His presence among the immortals was proof that redemption was always possible. But what did this technique reveal about the nature of the Force itself? The Sith sought immortality through power, clinging to existence through unnatural means. The Jedi who transcended death did so not by grasping at life, but by surrendering to the Force completely. Their presence after death was not a remnant of who they had been, but a continuation of what they had become. They were no longer bound by time or place. They had become one with the Force, eternal and ever-present, guiding those who would listen. The Jedi believed the dark side was the enemy of balance, something to be eradicated rather than understood. To them, darkness was corruption, a force that consumed and destroyed. Yet the Force itself was not divided by morality. It existed beyond the definitions of good and evil, an energy that flowed through all things. The Jedi sought to suppress one side of it, convinced that harmony could only be achieved by eliminating darkness. But what if this belief was the very thing that created imbalance? There were Force users throughout history who did not follow the rigid path of the Jedi or the Sith. The Bendu, an ancient being who claimed to exist in the middle, rejected the idea that light and dark were opposing forces. He saw the Force as a whole, where both aspects had purpose. The Jedi, predecessors of the Jedi Order, believed balance came not from denying the dark side, but from understanding it. They walked both paths, knowing that the Force could not be separated into extremes without consequences. Anakin Skywalker's fall was the result of this imbalance. The Jedi trained him to reject emotion, to suppress fear, anger, and attachment. Yet the Sith used these very things to turn him. Had the Jedi acknowledged the truth that emotions were not inherently dangerous, would he have been vulnerable to Palpatine's influence? The Sith did not corrupt him by introducing something unnatural. They simply gave him permission to embrace what the Jedi had forbidden. The prophecy of the Chosen One foretold that Anakin would bring balance to the Force, yet this balance did not come through his time as a Jedi or as a Sith. It came through his final act, a choice that neither the Jedi nor the Sith could have predicted. By destroying the Emperor, he ended the Sith's control, but he also rejected the Jedi's rigid philosophy. He did not fight for one side or the other. He fought for his son, an act of love that transcended the divisions of the Force. Perhaps the true nature of balance was never about the triumph of light over dark. It was about breaking free from the illusions of both. The Force was neither good nor evil. It simply was. And those who sought to control it, whether in the name of order or power, were the ones who doomed themselves to imbalance. Scattered across the galaxy, hidden beneath ruins and overgrown by time, the lost Jedi temples were more than remnants of a forgotten age. They were conduits of the Force, places where ancient wisdom was inscribed into stone, where the echoes of past Jedi still lingered. These temples were not simply places of worship. They were centers of learning, constructed on planets rich with Force energy. Some were built to train Jedi, others to study the deeper mysteries of existence. The most well-known temple stood at the heart of Coruscant, a monument to the Jedi's influence at the height of the Republic. But beyond it, there were sanctuaries far older, predating even the Order itself. The temple on Ahch-To, hidden on an isolated world, held the earliest texts of the Jedi, their first understanding of balance. Lothal's temple, buried beneath the surface, was a gateway between the physical and the spiritual, existing outside of time itself. Jedha, long before the Empire's destruction, was home to those who sought the Force without claiming mastery over it. Many of these sites were abandoned after the fall of the Jedi. Some were destroyed, others lost to time. The Sith, in their attempt to erase the Order, ransacked temples in search of knowledge that had been hidden from them. But the Force does not forget. Even in ruins, these places still carried power. Whispers of old masters, traces of visions seen by those who once meditated there. Something remained. The Jedi had always believed that temples were more than stone and structure. They were built in alignment with the Force, positioned where its presence was strongest. The great tree in the Ahch-To temple, the vergence in the Lothal ruins, each was a connection to something greater, an extension of the Force's will. When Luke Skywalker stood in the sacred temple of the first Jedi, he was not simply in a place of history. He was in a place where the Force itself had guided his path. The question remains, do these temples still hold knowledge that was never discovered? If the Jedi had turned to their oldest sanctuaries before their fall, could they have seen what was coming? The Force leaves its mark on places as well as people. And in the forgotten halls of these ancient temples, the echoes of the past may still be waiting for those who seek them. The Force has shaped the destiny of the galaxy, flowing through all living beings, binding past and future in a cycle beyond mortal comprehension. The Jedi and Sith saw themselves as its wielders, but there were others, beings who did not simply use the Force but embodied it. These entities existed beyond the limits of the Jedi Code or the Sith's pursuit of power. They did not serve the will of the Republic or the Empire. They were something greater, something ancient, something the galaxy barely understood. Among these entities were the Celestials, a civilization so powerful that even history itself struggled to remember them. Legends spoke of their influence in shaping the stars, of their knowledge surpassing anything the Jedi or Sith could conceive. It was said that they built entire star systems, controlling gravity and matter with a command of the Force that defied logic. The Maw, a cluster of black holes feared throughout the galaxy, was believed to be their creation. But the Celestials vanished, leaving behind only echoes of their existence. What happened to them? Did they ascend beyond the known galaxy, or were they consumed by a power even they could not control? Then there were the Ones, beings who ruled over Mortis, a realm beyond space and time. The Father, the Son, and the Daughter, figures who embodied the Force itself. The Father sought balance, the Daughter embodied the light, and the Son embraced the darkness. Their existence was not a myth. Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ahsoka Tano encountered them, pulled into a reality that defied the laws of the universe. The Father saw Anakin as the one who could replace him, the only being strong enough to control the warring aspects of light and dark. But Anakin refused, and Mortis collapsed into chaos. If the Ones were truly aspects of the Force, then what did their destruction mean? Did it signal the rise of imbalance in the galaxy, or was their conflict an eternal cycle, repeating itself in different forms across history? The Son sought to control the Force, believing that darkness was the true path to power. The daughter, in contrast, sacrificed herself to preserve life, demonstrating that the light was not about destruction, but protection. Their struggle was not unlike the battle between Jedi and Sith, but on a scale far beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Other beings, less known but no less powerful, walked the space between the living and the cosmic force. The Bendu, an ancient entity that resided on a Tolon, existed outside of the binary struggle between light and dark. When Kanan Jarrus, a Jedi who had survived the Purge, sought the Bendu's wisdom, he did not receive answers, he received perspective. The Bendu claimed to be balance itself, refusing to take sides in the war between Jedi and Sith. But balance, as he saw it, was not peace. It was nature, unpredictable, impartial, capable of great destruction, as well as renewal. This raised a deeper question. Was the Force itself a consciousness? The Jedi believed in its will, that it guided events and shaped destinies. But if it was truly sentient, then was the Force choosing sides, or was it simply allowing life to unfold as it always had? If the Celestials, the Ones, and the Bendu all represented aspects of the Force, then was the galaxy merely a reflection of their conflict? Even Yoda, in the twilight of his years, sought knowledge beyond what the Jedi Order had ever taught him. Through the guidance of Qui-Gon Jinn, he glimpsed the deeper mysteries of the Force, discovering that true mastery was not about wielding power but surrendering to it. This revelation came too late for the Jedi. They had spent centuries trying to define the Force in rigid terms, seeing the light as salvation and the dark as corruption. But the existence of these entities suggested that the Force was neither good nor evil. It simply was. The Sith sought to dominate the Force, to bend it to their will. The Jedi sought to serve it, to uphold an interpretation of balance that they themselves had defined. But the ancient beings who existed beyond them, who had touched the Force in ways no Jedi or Sith ever could, saw it differently. The Father of Mortis did not seek to destroy light or dark. He sought to contain them, to prevent one from overpowering the other. The Bendu did not view the Sith as an aberration to be erased, but as part of a greater natural order. So what then was the true nature of the Force? Did it have a plan, or was it merely the energy of life itself, shifting in response to the actions of those who wielded it? Was Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side inevitable because the Force willed it? Or was it the result of choices shaped by flawed interpretations of balance? The Jedi and Sith had always believed they were the center of the Force's story, but the existence of beings who transcended them suggested that they were only a fraction of something far greater. The Celestials, the Ones, the Bendu. Each pointed to a truth the galaxy had barely begun to understand. The Force was not merely an energy field. It was something beyond definition, beyond control, beyond even the knowledge of those who had spent their lives studying it. And if these entities still existed, hidden in the corners of the galaxy, then the story of the Force was far from over. Holocrons, silent vaults of knowledge, waiting in the shadows of history. Within their crystalline matrices lay the voices of those long dead, their wisdom preserved across millennia. The Jedi and Sith both understood the power of these devices, using them as repositories of knowledge, strategy, and prophecy. But holocrons were not just tools for instruction. They were remnants of forgotten eras, containing secrets that could change the course of the galaxy. The Jedi Order treated their holocrons as sacred artifacts, stored deep within the archives of the Coruscant Temple. Only those deemed worthy could access them. Each holocron carried the teachings of Jedi Masters from different ages, their holographic projections able to guide future generations. Some spoke of philosophy, others of battle techniques. Some held dire warnings, prophecies of darkness rising, of mistakes repeated. They were meant to be beacons of guidance, yet they also served as a reminder of the Order's failures. The Sith Holocrons were different. While Jedi Holocrons required patience and clarity to access, Sith Holocrons demanded strength, passion, and an understanding of the dark side's power. They were not just records, they were temptations, each containing echoes of their creator's influence. Many Jedi who sought to study them had been consumed by the knowledge they uncovered. The Sith understood that power could be passed down not just through bloodlines, but through the teachings locked within these ancient relics. Darth Bane, the founder of the Rule of Two, ensured that his holocron would carry his teachings into the future. It was through his recordings that Darth Sidious, centuries later, would refine the Sith's master plan. Exile Kun's holocron whispered of dark rituals that could extend life beyond death. Freedon Nad's spoke of dominion over the Force itself. The Sith did not hoard knowledge for protection, they weaponized it. The Jedi, in contrast, sought to protect their holocrons from misuse. After the fall of the Jedi Order, many of these artifacts were either destroyed or lost, their knowledge slipping into obscurity. Luke Skywalker, during his efforts to rebuild the Order, searched for them across the galaxy. Some he found, hidden in ruins, or buried beneath the sands of forgotten worlds. Others had fallen into the hands of those who did not understand their significance, their wisdom locked away by time. But holocrons were more than just history. They were warnings. They recorded the decisions of Jedi who had stood on the precipice of darkness, of Sith who had sought immortality and suffered for it. In some cases, they spoke of events that had not yet come to pass. Jedi holocrons held prophecies, glimpses of futures that had yet to unfold. The Sith, too, recorded their visions, though their interpretations were often bent toward domination. The most infamous example was the prophecy of the Chosen One, which existed within multiple holocrons across different eras. Some masters saw it as a promise, others as a warning. But the holocrons did not provide answers, only perspectives. The truth remained elusive, shaped by those who sought it. Holocrons also contained secrets that the Jedi had deliberately hidden. Not all knowledge, they believed, was meant to be shared. Some teachings were too dangerous, too close to the lure of the dark side. The archives of Coruscant held holocrons that spoke of Force techniques lost to time, powers that blurred the line between light and dark. Force drain, the ability to siphon life from another. Essence transfer, a technique that allowed a spirit to take over another's body. Even the Jedi's own history was sometimes erased, locked away in holocrons that only the Council could access. But history does not stay buried forever. After the fall of the Republic, the Emperor sought to claim every holocron he could find. Palpatine understood their value, not just as tools of knowledge, but as weapons. He used them to manipulate, to corrupt, to twist history into something that suited his rule. He destroyed holocrons that contradicted his version of events. He ensured that the teachings of the Jedi faded into obscurity, while Sith knowledge remained in the hands of those who would use it. Yet not all holocrons were lost. Some remained hidden, waiting for the right hands to find them. On Lothal, a Sith holocron was nearly opened by Ezra Bridger, an act that could have set him on a dark path. On Ahch-To, Luke Skywalker uncovered ancient Jedi texts, their wisdom preserved in ways even holocrons could not match. Across the galaxy, fragments of knowledge remained, waiting to be pieced together. The holocrons were more than relics. They were echoes of the past, voices reaching forward through time. They preserved not only the victories of the Jedi, but their mistakes, The Sith used them to fuel their ambitions, but even their records carried lessons of failure. For those who sought them, Holocrons offered wisdom, but only if one was willing to question what was written. And so the last remaining Holocrons remained hidden, scattered across forgotten worlds, buried in ruins, locked away in vaults. Their secrets waited for the next generation to uncover them. But the question remained: was knowledge always a path to enlightenment, or was it a burden too great to bear? Luke Skywalker, the last Jedi of his era, carried the burden of legacy. He was not merely a warrior or a teacher. He was the inheritor of a tradition that had spanned millennia, a tradition that had shaped the fate of the galaxy time and time again. But in the end, he made a decision that few could understand. He walked away. He allowed the Jedi Order to end, believing that its time had passed. Was he right? Had the Jedi become a relic of an age that needed to be forgotten? Or was there a deeper truth, one that could only be understood through unlearning? Luke's journey was unlike that of any Jedi before him. He was not raised within the Order's rigid structure, nor was he trained from childhood to suppress his emotions. He came to the Force as an outsider, taught through experience, loss, and the weight of responsibility. His first teachers, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, had given him wisdom, but they had also given him a flawed view of the Jedi's history. They told him that the Jedi were protectors of peace, that the dark side had to be resisted at all costs. But they never told him of the Order's failures, of its arrogance, of how its strict dogma had led to its downfall. When Luke set out to rebuild the Jedi, he did so with the best intentions. He gathered knowledge, trained students, and sought to restore what had been lost. Yet in doing so, he fell into the same traps that had ensnared the Jedi before him. He believed in discipline over understanding, in rules over instinct. And when he saw darkness in his nephew Ben Solo, he reacted with the same fear that had driven the Jedi Council to reject Anakin Skywalker generations before. In a single moment, his failure became complete. His temple burned, his students were slaughtered, and the last hope for a new generation of Jedi was lost. It was this failure that led Luke to exile. He did not simply flee. He sought to erase the Jedi from history. He came to believe that the Force was better left untouched, that the Jedi had done more harm than good. The Order had fought for peace, but had been manipulated into war. It had trained its knights to resist the dark side, yet had failed to understand its true nature. Luke saw himself as the end of a cycle that needed to be broken. If the Jedi existed, the Sith would rise to oppose them. If balance was to be restored, the Jedi had to disappear. But the Force had other plans. Rey arrived on Ahch-To, seeking guidance, believing that Luke Skywalker was the key to saving the galaxy. She came with hope, with the same fire that had once driven Luke to seek out Yoda. But she found a man who had turned his back on everything she believed in. Luke refused to train her, refused to take up his lightsaber, refused to see himself as a hero. He had learned a painful truth. The Jedi had never been the sole guardians of the Force. They had claimed wisdom, but they had also imposed limits on what the Force could be. Rey's presence forced Luke to confront the reality he had tried to escape. She challenged him, not just with words, but with her raw connection to the Force. She had no formal training, no years of study, yet she wielded the Force with an ease that defied the old ways. She was proof that the Jedi were not necessary for the Force to endure. And yet, Luke hesitated. He saw his own past in her. The same reckless determination, the same belief that the Force alone could fix the galaxy's wounds. It was only through reconnecting with Yoda's spirit that Luke understood his final lesson. The Jedi's mistakes did not mean their knowledge had no value. Failure was not the end of learning. It was the foundation of wisdom. The old Jedi texts that Luke had guarded so closely were not sacred. They were merely the writings of those who had come before, guides but not commandments. The future was not meant to be dictated by the past. It was meant to be shaped by those willing to move forward. In the end, Luke did not return as the Jedi Order's savior. He did not seek to rebuild what had been lost. Instead, he did something far greater. He embraced the truth of what the Jedi were always meant to be. They were not soldiers, not enforcers of rigid doctrine. They were seekers of knowledge, students of the Force, protectors of hope. And so, in his final moments, he became exactly that. He faced Kylo Ren not with a blade, but with understanding. He did not fight to kill, he fought to inspire. His presence alone reignited the spark of rebellion, reminding the galaxy that hope could never be truly extinguished. And then, Luke Skywalker became one with the Force. His physical form faded, but his legacy endured. Rey carried that legacy forward, but not as a Jedi in the way the Order had once defined them. She took what she had learned and forged something new. She was not bound by the Jedi's mistakes, nor was she consumed by the Sith's hunger for power. She stood between them, guided by her own understanding of the Force. So was Luke right to let the Jedi die? Perhaps the Jedi Order as it once existed needed to end. But the spirit of the Jedi, their quest for knowledge, their devotion to balance, lived on. The Jedi did not need temples, hierarchies, or grand titles to exist. They needed only those willing to listen to the Force, to follow its will without being shackled by the past. Luke Skywalker's true path was not to restore the old ways, but to break free from them. And in doing so, he ensured that the Force would never belong to one order, one ideology, or one name. It would always endure, carried forward by those who sought it, unburdened by the weight of history. The Force has always moved beyond the control of those who seek to define it. The Jedi once believed they were its sole guardians, just as the Sith believed they could bend it to their will. But the Force is neither possession nor weapon. It exists beyond the reach of any single philosophy. Throughout history, light and dark have risen and fallen in an endless cycle, yet the Force itself remains unchanged. The question now is not what the Jedi or Sith will become, but what the Force will shape next. The downfall of the Jedi Order did not mean the end of the Force's influence. If anything, it allowed something new to emerge, Force-sensitive individuals who exist outside the traditions that once ruled them. Rey's journey was proof that knowledge of the Force does not require formal training. She had no ancient masters to guide her, yet she stood as its wielder nonetheless. Hers was a path not defined by the Jedi Code, nor corrupted by Sith ambition. She did not seek to destroy the past, but neither did she allow it to dictate her future. But Rey is not alone. Across the galaxy, others awaken to the Force without the rigid structures of old to confine them. Without the Jedi Temple to train Padawans, or the Sith to claim apprentices, these new Force users are free to explore their connection in ways previously unseen. Some may follow the principles of the Jedi, striving for peace and balance, while others may tread darker paths, lured by power and fear. And then there are those who stand between, neither bound by light nor consumed by shadow, wanderers who hear the Force in its rawest form. The Bendu once spoke of this middle path, existing beyond the war between Jedi and Sith. There have been many throughout history who embodied this philosophy: the Grey Jedi, the Night Sisters, the Guardians of the Wills. These Force traditions were dismissed, ignored, or lost beneath the weight of the Republic's teachings. But in their own way, They understood something the Jedi never did. The Force does not choose sides. It moves, it flows, and it seeks balance in ways that the galaxy cannot always understand. But can the cycle of darkness and light ever truly be broken? Every age of peace has been followed by war. The Republic fell to the Sith, the Empire fell to the Rebellion, and even after the fall of the First Order, conflict still lingers. The Force does not demand war, yet those who wield it have often used it as justification for their battles, and so the pattern repeats, shifting names and faces, but never changing in its core. The Force does not choose war, but those who wield it do. Perhaps the future of the Force lies not in a new order rising to replace the old, but in something altogether different. If balance is truly the goal, then the Force must be allowed to move freely, unshackled from the mistakes of the past. The Jedi sought to suppress emotion, fearing its connection to darkness, but the Force itself is not afraid. It is passion as much as serenity, chaos as much as order. If the Jedi could not understand this, perhaps the next generation will. The question remains, is the Jedi Order necessary at all? Luke once believed it was not. He saw the failures of the past and sought to let them die. But was that the right path? The Jedi were flawed, but they were also the greatest defenders of peace the galaxy had ever known. Their mistakes should not be ignored, but neither should their wisdom. The problem was never the Jedi themselves, but their refusal to evolve. If the Force is always in motion, should not those who wield it move with it? Perhaps Rey represents a new way forward. She carries the Jedi's legacy, but she is not bound by their rules. She has seen the power of the dark side, yet she does not fear it. She wields the Force not as an enforcer of doctrine, but as one who listens to its will. If there is to be balance, it may not come from resurrecting the past, but from forging something new, something beyond Jedi and Sith, something that understands the Force in its purest form. The future of the Force is unwritten. It does not belong to a single order, a single philosophy, or a single bloodline. It will move as it always has, calling to those who are willing to listen. And for the first time in millennia, those who hear its call may not be bound by old expectations. They may be free to explore its depths without fear of breaking tradition. Perhaps that is what balance was always meant to be, not the triumph of light over darkness, nor the eradication of one side or the other, but the acceptance that both will always exist, and that the Force is greater than either. The Force will never die. It will find new champions, new voices, and new ways to shape the galaxy. The question is no longer who will control it, but who will be wise enough to follow where it leads. For all their study, all their devotion, the Jedi never truly understood the Force. Neither did the Sith. Even those who transcended death, who became one with the Force itself, still spoke in riddles, their knowledge incomplete. The Force is vast, unbound by the limitations of language or philosophy. Every attempt to define it, to shape it into something absolute, has failed. That is its greatest mystery. The Jedi believed they served the Force's will, yet they could not agree on what that will truly was. The Sith sought to control it, to bend it to their desires, yet even their greatest lords were undone by its unpredictability. The Bendu, the ones of Mortis, the guardians of the wills, all of them touched the Force in ways beyond the understanding of the Jedi Order, yet none could claim full mastery. Every new discovery led only to more questions. Luke Skywalker, at the height of his power, thought he understood what the Jedi should be. Later, in Exile, he questioned everything. Yoda, after centuries of wisdom, admitted that even he was still learning. Qui-Gon Jinn, who defied the Council to follow the living force, did not live to see whether his path was the right one. And Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, was destined to bring balance, yet what that balance truly meant was never explained. Perhaps that is the lesson. The Force is not meant to be fully understood. It is not a puzzle to be solved, not a power to be mastered. It is a journey, a question that never has a final answer. Those who seek absolute truth within it will always be left searching. Those who think they have found it will always be proven wrong. The Jedi thought balance meant the eradication of darkness. The Sith believed strength was the ultimate truth. Both were wrong. The Force does not take sides. It whispers, it guides, but it does not explain. Even those who listen closely can misinterpret its voice. The visions of Jedi often led them to act, yet how many of those actions created the very future they feared? Foresight did not prevent tragedy. Knowledge did not prevent war. The search for understanding will never end. That is the final truth the Force teaches. Not victory, not dominance, not even peace, but the endless pursuit of wisdom. The Force does not demand that those who wield it be perfect. It only asks that they keep searching. The Jedi have risen and fallen. The Sith have come and gone. Empires have been built and destroyed, yet through it all, the Force remains. It is older than the Jedi Order, older than the Republic, older than the first beings who ever looked to the stars and felt something greater than themselves. It is infinite, eternal, shifting through time in ways no one fully comprehends. The story of the Force is not one of endings, nor of victory or defeat, but of cycles, of balance found, lost, and found again. From the earliest records of the Prime Jedi, through the fall of the Old Republic, to the rise of Luke Skywalker, the Force has always found a way to manifest through those who are willing to listen. It is not bound by doctrine or tradition. It does not belong to the Jedi or the Sith. The Force is a living thing, ever flowing, ever speaking, always searching for those who are ready to hear its call. The Jedi believed themselves its guardians, yet time and again, their understanding was incomplete. They saw balance as the absence of darkness, never realizing that light without shadow is just as blinding. The Sith sought control, believing power was the ultimate truth, never realizing that to dominate the Force was to sever oneself from its deeper mysteries. Each side, in its own way, misunderstood the nature of the Force. It does not seek to be wielded. It does not demand loyalty. It simply exists, waiting for those who are open enough to feel its presence. History repeats itself because the Force is not a straight path. It is a current, a cycle, forever shifting. It flows through all things, connecting all life, but never in a single direction. What is destroyed will one day rise again. What is forgotten will be remembered. This is why the Jedi always return, even after they fall. Why the darkness always stirs, even when it seems defeated. Why those who feel lost can still find their way. To some, this might seem like an endless struggle, but perhaps the lesson is different. Perhaps balance is not about winning. Perhaps it is about movement, about harmony, about understanding that the Force is neither an end nor a means, but a story. One that has no final chapter. It speaks through the past, through the present, and into the future, always whispering, always guiding, if only one is willing to listen. And so the Force remains. It lingers in the ruins of forgotten temples, in the quiet voices of those who still seek its wisdom, in the hearts of those who refuse to let hope fade. It is there in the smallest moment of connection, in the act of compassion, in the choice to rise when all seems lost. The Force will always be with us. It does not fade. It does not end. It waits, not for warriors, not for masters, but for those who are ready to hear its call. It surrounds us, binds us, and speaks to us. All we must do is listen.